We are here doing the first of the Andor series. So it is myself and it's going to be my co-host for this series, this run, but it's not going to be in the style that Rhea and Tonya did, or that Spider Dan and Tonya are currently doing with She-Hulk and with Ms. Marvel. And we're actually going to be doing alternating. So instead of it being both of us at the same time it's going to be 10 episodes, I believe, because there's 12 episodes of Andor, and then we obviously got the 3 this week. And there will be spoilers ahead, friends, just to warn. But with that, we thought we'll do alternating because it makes it a little bit easier, and then, get our own guests and that kind of little thing. And then we'll probably come back at the end, probably just the 2 of us. And it will just be a nice thing where for the middle 8 episodes are going to be you and I each speaking with another guest or guests about our opinions on things. There'll be returning guests, people speak to you and me, but it's going to be a few different things. So, Jack, thank you so much for agreeing to host. Is this your first? Obviously, you've done seasons greetings and things like that, but is this going to be your first sort of weekly hosting duties on Comics in Motion?
I did the Nevers way back when that came out.
Yes.
Because I wanted to do it as a side project for Seasons Greetings, just to try and boost Seasons Greetings a little bit as well. So no, I guess not. I had forgotten until this very moment when you asked me that I had done the Nevers, actually. So this feels fresh. This feels new, like a new endeavour. And I think the way that you've come up with the concept of how we're going to do it is going to be a really interesting format. And I think what it's allowing us to do, you've just mentioned it there, is bring in different voices for each different episode, because you have this big wealth of Star Wars fandom to your beck and call from all the hard work you do already around the Star Wars universe, I should say Star Wars galaxy. Whereas I guess for me, and looking at the guests I've got lined up, some of them are quite fresh voices. Some of them are new voices almost completely to Comics in Motion, if not one appearance. So we're going to be getting some interesting chats, I think, out of this.
Yeah, I agree. And it's going to be exciting. It's a fun thing to try out, because it's as much as I love doing the weekly shows, it is a lot to time-wise. And at the moment, people in the UK especially are aware that Bake Off is on. And I've promised, Megan made me put Bake Off in the calendar, specifically on Tuesday nights. I'm not allowed to do anything else. We're allowed to have people over, but they have to respect and watch Bake Off as it's airing. So every Tuesday now is gone for me for the next, and I think it's 10 weeks as well. So that's gone. And then we've got Andor. We've got obviously She-Hulk still going on. I'm trying to watch House of Dragon. RuPaul's Drag Race, which is Megan's second love in the world, is coming back as well. So it's like, almost every day of the week now, I don't even need to make any decisions. It's just this episode, this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's totally fair. It's hard. It's almost impossible to keep up now, isn't it? Like, I haven't started House of Dragon. I haven't started Lord of the Rings.
I haven't started Lord of the Rings.
They're just to fit that in the schedule amongst everything else that we do in terms of the couple of hours we've got in the evening. And I'm the same with my partner, with my 2 boys. You want family time, and that's precious. And we do family movie night every other weekend, where it's like, try to introduce my eldest to some films which I grew up with, or some weekends he picks and it's what he wants to watch. All of that is precious. So yeah, you get a couple of nights a week, and if you've got Bake Off, you've got Bake Off. You've got to fit it in.
Yeah, Bake Off's more serious because we watch it live as well. So whereas obviously other stuff is we just watch it on demand, and the thing with Bake Off is you can watch it on demand, but Bake Off is from 8 p.m. till 9:30 p.m. ish, and it doesn't normally go on to all 4 for sometimes 10-15 minutes after it's finished. So to start something that's an hour and a half, including adverts, at 9:30 for Megan is very late. And so we've waited before, and it hasn't gone on till 10. And then you're up until almost midnight to watch Bake Off. And you can't really do anything else because you're just constantly waiting. Because you're like, Bake Off's going to be on in available for 5 minutes.
Refresh.
Exactly. But this isn't about Bake Off. This is about Star Wars. But with Andor, so there's the 3 episodes. Did you watch them in one go? Did you watch them by yourself? I think you did. How do you watch these? I'm interested.
So I did watch them all in one go. I mainlined them from about 9 o'clock-ish last night, 8:30 last night. So yeah, my 2 boys were in bed. My partner Emma did join me for the first one and a bit. Then she fell asleep on the sofa during the second one. Woke up as the credits roll, because it's that natural, your body feels that natural change sometimes. She felt like the conversation started, the music kicked in, so she took herself off to bed. And today she told me, I think I might just leave you to watch it. So unfortunately it's lost one person already, which does surprise me, because she watched all of Obi-Wan and really, really enjoyed it. So I thought here, with the freshness of the concept, the what's the word I'm searching for? It does have that. I'm loath to try and use some of the language that I've seen some other people use out on the internet, because I don't think it's totally different, but it is it is a little bit more grungy. It is a little bit more underworld, to use a bad word, considering all that Star Wars underworld stuff that never came to fruition. But which would have also equally could have been awesome too. So yeah, I thought this would get her, but she felt like it was a little bit slow. And yeah, we're back, as we were just discussing with her, we're back to schools. Everyone's that little bit more tired than they were during the summer. And I think, unfortunately, it's the pressure that of having to watch it. I think if we could watch it when we wanted, she might come back. But knowing that I've got to do these on a Wednesday, it has to be watched because I'm recording. And then, yeah, I think she's clocked out, unfortunately. But to come back full circle, I guess this might be where you were thinking of leading the conversation around. I think the release, the three together, felt onerous before I watched it. I was like, oh, what? Like, that's a lot. But now, having seen it, it makes total sense. It plays like a mini movie, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree completely. That's what I was thinking, because funnily enough, Megan did something kind of similar with Andor. So we didn't think we'd be able to watch all three in one evening, but we watched the first one and she was like, yeah, it was all right, but it was only, I've got written down, excluding credits, is 36 minutes. Rather than, it looks like it's, nearly 50, but it's not. And then the second episode, she started to doze off at nearest to sort of the end. She kind of started, I think she missed the last 5 minutes or so. And that episode is 30 and a half minutes-ish, excluding the recap and the credits. And then the last episode we watched today, I watched it yesterday when Megan went to bed, like you, so I had a short break, about 20 minutes in between. And we were sorting out the dog and all that sort of stuff. And then I sat down and watched the rest of it last night. And then I rewatched the third episode today. And that episode is 35 minutes. So it's 36, 30, 35. So they're not like She-Hulk length, really quite short. But they are, they're nice length, I suppose. They don't feel like they're very short. But Megan, after watching the first two, she was like, yeah, it was pretty good, I guess. I'm not super into it, sort of thing. Hasn't grabbed me. And then after this episode, she was like, I'm getting it more. And I think, as you rightly said, it's just as a content creator, you see three and you're like, oh, that's so annoying. Like I've already committed to this, and I have to watch. This is excluding the recaps and the credits and all that stuff. It's about 101 minutes, so it's about an hour 40. But including all the stuff you do in between, pause, go to the toilet, get a drink, whatever, it ends up being about 2 hours ish. So it is basically, as you say, like a movie, and it is a cool movie, and I like it, and I think the way it is thematically, it feels very like mature in a way, and I don't once again that's a word that's used I think quite a lot online, but it feels like, although I loved Kenobi and I love Mandalorian and all these sort of other things, and I like Book of Boba Fett, it feels like this show really isn't like okay for kids. Like there are certain points, and I was like, I don't think you could let certain 7-year-olds watch it, but this isn't a show for 7-year-olds. With Kenobi and stuff, there's a couple of bits with Vader that are a bit intense, but Vader is like this big scary monster villainy thing, so you can kind of get away with it. I think you can, because of Leia being there in Kenobi, you can show that kind of, it has that gateway almost to children being able to be not proper young, but the right kind of young person would be able to kind of deal with that. But this show, although there's not like necessarily outright gore, there's a bit of blood, there's those like the scene that we're flitting around, but I'll try and vaguely go chronologically, but the scene where the people are like choking on that gas stuff and they're going all yellow and stuff. It's like, that's pretty grim. Like it feels like this show isn't pulling punches, and there's a lot of, I feel, very, in especially episode 3, social commentary that is very, very well played, I think. That's kind of my overview. So before we delve into like the specific details and things of this, with going into Andor, obviously Rogue One is generally considered to be probably the best of the new Disney films. Some people argue The Force Awakens. I personally enjoy Force Awakens more, but I think Rogue One's probably a better made movie. What did you think of Rogue One? And when Andor was announced, what were your kind of thoughts of, like, were you that excited? Were you like, I'm going to watch it because of Star Wars? Or like, what were your kind of, your thoughts before going in?
I do really like Rogue One, but I do feel like it's a film that has been made by two people, which we know it is. It was Gareth Edwards and it got taken off. It was Tony Doyle. So I do feel that there's moments that are quite jarring in that movie that don't slot together. So I do feel from a construction point, from a creative point, there are flaws in it. That said, it does do something slightly off center. It does do something slightly different for the Star Wars universe. It doesn't quite follow that classic hero's journey, and it is a brave ending. We have to give it that. And I know we kind of knew that before we watched it. You still got to commit to doing that. You've got to commit to doing that to all your main characters. And what it does do well enough, no, that's not fair. What it does do well is establish new characters that you like enough that the end matters. So I know I'm talking around it. Everyone's seen Rogue One, right? They kill everybody off. But like that matters. Like, you care when Jyn dies. You care when Cassian Andor dies. And everyone else amongst the crew. So I guess I felt pleased because I think Diego Luna is an amazing actor and I thought he brought a lot to that role. And I think across 24 episodes, he will bring an awful lot to this show. Mm-hmm. But there is that perennial prequel problem, isn't there? And this is a prequel to a prequel, which I know everyone is quite enjoying saying online, but it is true and it is a little bit silly in that way that we know where this is going. So these 3 episodes I thought did really nice world building. I've heard people describe it as slow. I didn't find that at all. I really enjoyed the world building in this. And I think this used flashbacks in a way that were organic to the story and were organic to his character journey, much better than Boba Fett did, which felt tacked together and felt like forced. Here, the way they edited it together, I thought it had a natural flow. And I think we get to a place within these 3 episodes that is really natural and where we should to launch this story forward. And you can see now that his character is going to move on and become the guy we meet in Rogue One. But there's still that worry of the lack of jeopardy. Yeah. There's a really well choreographed, brilliantly the production design of that. I know I'm jumping now to the end of that warehouse set in episode 3 was awesome. Yeah. But we know he's going to survive. So there is still that problem hanging over it, unfortunately.
That is one of the biggest problems you have with Star Wars. Because with Marvel, generally speaking, each release usually is forward in the timeline. There's the occasions like Black Widow, she was done dirty. If that film had come out, between Infinity War and Endgame, it'd have done so much better. It'd have been incredible and it would have been really on point. But or even before that, if it was like when it was actually set, that would have worked really well as a film. But then once again, there was no stakes in it. And same with Captain Marvel in a way. And apart from there's a couple of instances in the MCU, usually the MCU doesn't have to deal with this. So even when you're watching an MCU property, apart from the kind of in your head knowledge thinking the titular character's probably not going to die in their own series, that general idea, aside from that kind of thing, but you don't always know that and you don't know where that's going to go. But as you say, it's not that we think the main characters are going to survive because they're the titular character and we know there's, 24 episodes. It's because we've seen him die. And it's the same with the Kenobi show. The Kenobi series I really enjoyed it. I thought it was it had its flaws. I did thoroughly enjoy it. I thought it did what the prequels did. There were some incredible moments, but there was also some sillier moments and a bit of fluff. But with this, I feel like we know what's happening with Andor, but the good thing is that Rogue One kind of establishes he barely knew anyone in Rogue One. The characters all knew. He's just kind of him and K2SO. So with that in mind, in some ways it helps, but in some ways it makes it worse at the same time because it kind of goes, oh, none of these characters you've seen before, so you don't know their fates. It's like, but if they meant a lot to Cassian, they probably would have been called upon or mentioned by him in Rogue One, so they're probably actually going to die. So they've kind of trapped themselves by going, this one character is definitely going to die, and these characters, so this character, is definitely not going to die, and all these other characters probably are. And that's going to be how it is. And it's like, okay, that's fine. I'm still invested, and I think, as you say, the way they've done all the characters, this feels... I've heard it described online as, this isn't just like a good Star Wars series, this is actually a good, well-made series that's in the Star Wars universe. And I think that's a lot of what these other things have been lacking is, apart from probably Mandalorian, most people who don't care about Star Wars wouldn't, like if I got half my mates who've just seen most of the Star Wars films, most of them haven't even seen Episode 9 or Solo, with them, like if you got them to watch Kenobi, they'd be like, yeah, this is what you like, Mike. This is just Star Wars. This is people with lightsabers fighting, a bit of cheesy lines, but cool music and everything looks nice. When people saw Rogue One, it kind of broke that mold a bit. It's like you can be any level of Star Wars fan, even if you're kind of meh to Star Wars, you're just someone who casually watches them because they're big central films to pop culture. You can watch Rogue One and really enjoy it because it's not a good Star Wars film. It's like a brilliant film in itself. And in doing that, it makes Star Wars better. And that's, I think, what this show is showing signs of. I think Mandalorian had pieces of. I think The Mandalorian still wasn't as great as everyone said, especially not Series 1. I did really enjoy it, don't get me wrong. But it wasn't like mind-blowingly phenomenal. I found Series 2 did that a bit more. But with this, I'm kind of thinking, just the way this feels like almost a HBO show, if you know what I mean, like the same kind of weight and quality and story and budget it feels as House of Dragon, as Chernobyl was, as Breaking Bad, because that wasn't HBO, but the kind of big HBO shows. Yeah, that's how it feels to me, I'd say, with this.
Yeah, I think you've made I think your analogies there are spot on. Like Kenobi is very prequelish, and I'm sure Ewan McGregor wouldn't be happy to hear that. But it is. It definitely is. And this, of course, is very Rogue One-ish in that way that it's carving out its own little niche within the universe. It is more accessible. I think, this is what you're saying. You may have even used that word. I apologize. It's more accessible for the general fan, but has enough Star Wars about it to interest and pull those people along. I mean, that I think that's pretty much Tony Gilroy's mission statement, isn't it? Is that this needs to be something that everyone can enjoy. It's not going to be fan baity and fan servicing, but it's going to be recognizably within the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like you with going into this. I was like, I'll watch it at Star Wars. I'm happy to see an Andor series. As you say, Diego Luna's amazing in basically everything I've seen him in. And he's really passionate. And you see him in interviews how excited he was. Because he was like, I loved being in Star Wars. I loved playing Andor. He's such a cool character. And we just thought, one and done. But I get to come back and we get to really spend time in this. And one of the things, and this is will kind of feed into the first episode, is one of the things I love this show does, and I really like it when other shows or movies do it right, when they and there's a lot of times I think they haven't done it right, which is the flashbacks having a dialect that isn't of the main film. So in this it's English, Galactic Basic. So with it not being English, they're speaking the language of Canary, which I assume is a fully made up language in the Star Wars universe. I don't know if maybe they're using another language. I assume not, because people would have probably said something by now. But this thing where we don't need to know what's explicitly being said. You just, and that's kind of one of the things I think sets the flashbacks apart and makes it not very jarring. As well as it not just being, here's main story, here's 20 minutes of flashback, here's 15 minutes of story. Just every single episode is like a sandwich, and it's just like, as soon as you start getting into one, it changes the other one. It's in between moments, it kind of builds to what Andor knows, what he's kind of been through, and it shows how he's reacting to certain scenes. And obviously the final episode, there's that part where it's the very last thing you see is the flashback of him being picked up and him going around the ship. And that moment is just so well done. And it's all a build of these flashbacks, which until that one, you have no dialogue. And I love that choice.
Yeah, 100%. It's really, I think it's quite a brave choice. And certainly a creative decision they've made on purpose. Like they could have easily put up captions. They could have done if they wanted. They could have brought in a universal translator, or I don't know what the Star Wars version of that is. But yeah, absolutely, they could have done all of that. And I think for the first moments, I was like, oh, what's going on here? And then I just settled into that rhythm. I thought it worked excellently. I thought all the young actors really sold what their characters were feeling through facial expressions and body language. And just to repeat what you said, but back you up and maybe frame it slightly differently, as in that final moment of like the twin, if you like, the twin departures of the two planets, was so well crafted, and is the first 2 chapters of his life. Essentially, he was a boy on Canary, and that part of his life, that patch of his life, ended when he was forcibly taken away. And there's a really interesting way they could use to take that. I mean, his adopted mother thought he was doing what she thought was right, but she has taken him away from his family. That's a really interesting moment, which I hope the show might delve into. And then we've got his next patch of his life, which has been with her on Ferrix, was it, I think?
Yeah.
And what's come of that? And now he's leaving again with a new kind of like maybe surrogate father figure to go off in the next stage of his adventure and to learn what it is to join the rebellion and to channel his anger and his passion into something bigger than himself. It was really clever.
Yeah. It's just so well done. And it was, as you said, like, it was interesting seeing that sort of mentor character, Marva, I've got written down, because it's played by Fiona Shaw, who me and Megan recognise as being Aunt Petunia in Harry Potter.
Of course.
So it was like, seeing her not be awful, not an awful actress, brilliant actress, awful person. But so we start off with Andor. The way it all kicks off, we'll vaguely do this episode by episode. But obviously in this release of ours, it's 3 episodes at once, so it's very hard not to jump around. But in the future ones, we'll vaguely do a bit more episodic, sort of chronologically focused. But it starts off with, you've got the bar altercation, and that all kind of, there's intertwined with the flashbacks and things, but there's the bar altercation, the flashbacks, the looking for his sister and the information and the kind of interaction with those, well, they're not Imperial officers. They are specifically called the Pre-More security
authority. Pre-More authority.
Yeah. I've got it written down in like 4 different places, and I keep looking, and it's like I keep confusing it with the Imperial Security Bureau, who are a totally different thing. But sort of that altercation. So, what did you think of that start, the way it kind of kicked off?
I mean, it's a complete mission statement, isn't it? I think a couple of things it does that thing which you said, which is a bit more mature. I mean, he's basically in a brothel on what looks like a red light district, perhaps even on like a sex planet. I don't know. Like, it wasn't quite, but certainly this is the red light district, and this is a brothel he's in, right? So it's like, this isn't for kids, this show. And then what I thought it did really interesting was it mirrored our introduction to Cassian in Rogue One, in showing that he's ruthless when he needs to be. And I guess this is the start of that journey for him. He didn't want to shoot this second Pre-More security guard, did he? Mm-hmm. But he really was left with no choice. And I think obviously that mirroring his ruthlessness with I can't remember the name of the character in Rogue One, but he shoots him, doesn't need to cover his tracks.
Yeah, the one with the bad arm.
That's right. Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. And also, we are now rooting for a guy that's a cold-blooded killer. That's what I know. The first one was an accident, but this next guy is down on his knees saying, I'll lie, I'll do what I need to do, and he point blank shoots the guy in the face. So we're rooting for this guy. Now I know typically the Empire are space Nazis, but these guys are like Empire adjacent, aren't they? They're like, I don't know what to call them. They're like sort of an assistant force, or like they're not full Empire, really, are they? I can't wait till we talk about the main character who works for the Pre-More, because he's fantastic. But so I don't know. They're not like evil. They're dicks. These two guys were complete dicks. But yeah, I don't know. It's like all of this is brought up together, and this is the introduction to our character. And for some people, maybe they haven't seen Rogue One, you never know. This is introduction to your titular character, who clearly is doing something heroic. He's searching for his lost sister. We get that, so that's important that we know that. But then he is fighting people in back alleys and shooting in the face. Yeah, really interesting. What about you?
Yeah, I found that connecting, it's hard not to connect to the later parts, but there's later parts in the episodes where he does things and it's very questionable, and it is that kind of the unsure of how to feel about him. But yet I did really like his hesitation when you see him, because as you say, in Rogue One, he doesn't really hesitate. He's just kind of like, I've got to do this. It is almost like a moment, because he clearly likes this person, and I feel like we're going to meet them in Rogue One, in this series, sorry. And I will say, because I know that certain individuals of ours like to listen and don't want any spoilers for anything going to come out in this, I'm about to say a very minor spoiler for time-wise. So if you don't want to know anything about timeline of where these episodes are kind of vaguely around, just skip ahead a little bit. But it's basically that each collection of episodes, I can't remember how many exactly, is going to be like a year or so. So we're going to do story arcs, and then it's going to be a few years has passed, and it's like, I think it's every 6 episodes or something like that, is almost like a year is generally how they do it. And they've said that then the season 2, that who knows when that's coming out, but that will be like much closer to Rogue One than this is, obviously, and it's kind of going to be that big jump.
Yeah, this is 5 BBY, isn't there?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Something cool about BBY. I don't know why. I love it. I love a BBY caption. I'm just like,
it's great. It's great.
I don't know why. It's something about it, isn't there?
Whenever I do it for Comics in Canon, I'm always thrilled, because it's that I always, every now and then I do reiterate what it is. So for anyone listening, it's before the Battle of Yavin. So the Battle of Yavin is when they destroyed the Death Star in A New Hope, and it's the kind of out-of-universe main way of telling events apart. So, 19 BBY is when Luke Skywalker was born. It's also the year of Order 66, that sort of thing, and 0 BBY or 0 ABY, 0 years after the Battle of Yavin. That's A New Hope, and then it kind of goes from there. But this is, 5 years before The New Hope, and Rogue One was obviously like, depending on certain parts of it were further back, but generally speaking, the main events of Rogue One was like weeks before. A New Hope, and at certain points, like days and hours, it seems. So, yeah, but I enjoyed seeing Andor in this, and it felt quite Mandalorian-esque to me. And it was the first scene in The Mandalorian, I think, is actually probably still one of the best of the show, of just core. If you need to show someone something for a few seconds to give you an idea of what it is, this is what's showing. And I want Star Wars. The thing I want about Star Wars is I had it described as like an all-you-can-eat buffet. That's how I want Star Wars to be. Not everyone's going to want a bit of everything. And I don't think that's how they should necessarily aim to go, because then you get things like Book of Boba Fett, which don't really know what they're doing, and they kind of have to dip into other series before standing up on their own. It feels like there's not confidence in it, blah, blah. And it's like, let's just have lots of crazy stuff going on in Star Wars, some in comics, some in books, some in games, some on TV, and then the big, like, huge events on screen, ideally big galactic events or big introductions to big new I keep saying big events and times in history. If you're going to go back to the Old Republic, do a movie first, and then we can span content out from that. Those sorts of ideas. And I think that this really shows that this is made for the adults. This is, or not just the adults, but just the mature audience who don't. This isn't for the the really young kids, because you go through this, and a lot of the themes and things you said that I can't remember if you said it on air or off air, but your partner felt like this was kind of slow, and I know other people online have said the same. And it is a slow burn kind of show, but when you watch most sort of great shows in air quotes, the big ones, the first episode normally has a bit of killing or a bit of action, and normally something to kind of hook you, and then from there it then kind of it dulls down a little bit, and then it picks up. The first season is normally the first episode or two are amazing, and then you've got a few episodes in the middle that are kind of world building in a more detailed sense, and then it goes to the crescendo of the finale of that series. And with this, as you said, where there's 3 episodes, I really like this introduction of the first episode, but I can see certain people being put off by it, not just necessarily by the start of it, but because it's a character a lot of people already know, and it's not immediately clear where they're going, what they're doing, what's this got to do with anything else. I thought we were going to dive into the rebellion and fighting the Empire, and it's a lot before that, how almost. So I do feel like that. I wonder if you had sort of thoughts on that regard.
No, I think you're right, and I've seen that same response online as well. For me, I think some of the stuff Tony Gilroy has said answers this. The fact that this is, for him, is a character study. It's a study in how Cassian Andor, it's called Andor, right? Like how he becomes that character we met in Rogue One. And it's going to be the external influences. It's going to be people that he meets along the way that he takes from. So we've already had this surrogate mother character. We're now going to have this potential surrogate father character. So I think these people are going to come and go, and they're going to inform who he is as a person. So I think that's part of it. He also keeps talking about the show for him as being more kind of like literary. And he keeps using this word like literary. And I think what he's trying to say is it's like, it's expansive, right? And for much as I love films and TV shows, you don't have the same depth you do as reading a book, because you don't have 300 and odd pages of narrative and prose and potential, like internal thoughts of characters, if it's first person. So you don't get all of that when you watch a film or TV, because it's got to move fast. It's got to be snappy. So I think that's what he's referring to. I think he wants this to be a slower pace. He wants this to be the externalization of who Andor is internally and how he becomes who he is. And I think that could make for a really fascinating show.
Yeah, because I agree. I think that for me personally, what I want this to see, like I've said before on various Star Wars conversations, and many that have nothing to do with Star Wars, that I think Star Wars Rebels is the best Star Wars content that exists. I'd probably argue the original trilogy is better to a degree. I enjoy Rebels more for a lot of reasons, but I think the original trilogy is kind of the gold standard almost of Star Wars for a lot of people. But for me, I think Rebels is, if not the second of the best Star Wars content we've got. And the criticism of Star Wars Rebels and for Star Wars, a lot of the animated show as a whole, is especially early on, is it doesn't start off that dark. It starts very light and very kid friendly, and then it delves into darker themes as the audience grows with it. That's why Series 4 of Clone Wars and Series 3 of Rebels are really dark, and there's quite a lot of killing, and in Clone Wars there's war crimes and all kinds of other stuff. Because the audience, if you started watching it as a 7-year-old, by the 3rd or 4th season, you're 10 or 11, you're kind of, you can deal with those things more. With Andor, it's set around the same time as Star Wars Rebels, but and people know that there's potentially going to be crossover. I imagine at some points, probably in the 2nd or 3rd series, maybe, who knows. But I don't necessarily want that. It's more like Rebels is the family side of Star Wars. Like, what can happen? Found family. Some of the lighter side of things. There's darkness and there's things that happen that are negative, but it's a story about a family in essence. And with Andor, it's not going to be that. It's going to be, here's some of the, like, as to quote Andor, paraphrase, he says, that he's done some horrible stuff for the rebellion. He's done some things for the greater good that he couldn't live with himself, and he can't have himself dying unless he does something that's a big gesture to make everything worth it. That's why he sacrifices himself in Rogue One. That's why he does that, because he feels guilty about some of the horrible stuff he's done. And in the context of the film, you think, oh yeah, he shot his friend with the arm, and there's obviously some other skeletons in the closet, but you just assume. And I think this is going to show, this is the kind of stuff you show initially. He's in bad faith with a lot of people. He owes people money and favors, and he's off doing stuff, and people aren't really sure about it, and it's a bit shifty, but we know who he becomes. So we're along for the ride. We're like, well, how does he get there? And what does he have to do to make him in a state where he's basically a martyr?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lovely way to think of it. I mean, look at Tony Gilroy's, background. The thing he's most known for is the Bourne movies. Well, that is a complicated character. That is a character we root for. That is an assassin. He spent most of his life going around killing people, and as he comes to learn, not necessarily for the right reasons, but we do root for him. So I think we can root for these people, and I think perhaps that's where the show, with us knowing what's going to happen to Andor, with us knowing that he martyrs himself, I like that use of that phrase, that's going to take us on this journey. That is going to not excuse, but it's going to explain how we can keep following him if we get to see him do some of these terrible things. I don't know if you've ever watched 24.
Not really.
That was massive.
I've seen all the Bourne movies apart from Bourne Legacy.
Sure.
But I've not seen 20. I've seen like a bit of bits and pieces. I know the general premise of the show. I think it's a very clever premise, having like in real time, but I've not fully watched it. But
across 11 seasons or something of that show, Emma and I keep talking about, like, oh, shall we try that out? And then we keep looking at how long it is, and we think, oh God, 24 episodes times 7, it's a lot. But Jack Bauer did some very questionable things across that show. But because we know, and again, you use this phrase, and I love that you use that phrase, that kind of greater good. But there's always a conversation of like, truly, where is that line? But that's an interesting conversation to have, and that's a real world conversation to have. And you mentioned social commentary in the show already. It's going to challenge that. I think it's going to, within the show and then within the viewers, ask us to it's going to play with that concept of what is acceptable, and can we accept seeing a protagonist? I'm not going to call him a hero, but a protagonist doing some of these things and still follow him and still want to root for him.
Yeah, and I think that we'll jump towards, like, as I said, this episode is not going to be all chronological, but linking in with what you said, I think it'd be a good time to speak about the car bomb, because that's something that, especially on the second watch, I have some very complicated feelings about, because the show does it very well, and obviously Tony Gilroy being sort of the head of a lot of what's going on here. I think that, obviously, Andor basically, the guy says right at the start, to his subordinate, who is the deputy inspector, who's the kind of main character of PREQUEL that you see a lot, and you mentioned, his superior says, look, this obviously was a fight that went wrong and he messed the wrong person. And he's right. He knows, he is correct. That is what happened. But in truth as well, following things by the book, 2 people were killed. And no one knows for certain why, and they need to investigate that. So although they're all dicks, or a lot of them are dicks, and the characters are somewhat unlikable, they believe what they're doing is right, because what they're doing is the law. And the law, in most people's eyes, it is the right thing to do. And there are instances in history where that's not the right thing to do, which I'm not going to delve into. But because of that, you've got them doing something they believe is right, because they've had fallen comrades and things. So they're going out there trying to find justice. They're trying to do the right thing. And in response, Andor is trying to get away, and we're rooting for him because we know he's a good guy, in theory, because we see him do the ultimate sacrifice and save the entire galaxy from the ultimate evil. So we already know he's a saint, basically. In the realm of Star Wars, he is a saint. He is a martyr. He's done those things. He's died for everything and everyone. So we're watching these people someone who's actually doing quite bad things against the law, and they're acting like dicks, and when they interact with the people, you can see that there is the disdain, and I think there's a lot of the social commentary about, I think especially in America, some of the opinions of the police and what the police have done, not just in recent years, but over many decades. With that, you've got people who are in law enforcement and things like that, who genuinely are trying to do the right thing. And there's others who are using it as a kind of a power trip in some ways, but are still following the law. And it becomes this very grey area. And the car bomb really threw me, because I was like, I think it's The Hurt Locker that I saw something like that, which is a phenomenal, phenomenal film that not enough people talk about. But in that, there's a car bomb scene, and car bombs are something that I'm fairly certain is, at least in my mind, associated with terrorism, because often it's in a civilian zone and things like that. So I got that thing, and I was like, these are basically guys doing their job, trying to find someone who killed their partners. They've just tried to go find them in a warehouse, and they've just blown up several things, killing even more of their partners. They're trying to go after that. And then they try and drive away in a getaway vehicle. The people stop the vehicle, it blows up and things, but then they go and check. They don't throw bombs in this blown up vehicle. They don't hold their guns out and start shooting in there even more. They are like walking up to this thing thinking, we've disabled Andor and whoever. We've done our job, in a way. And then the bomb goes off to kill people who are not necessarily innocent, but it's very much like a cold-blooded shooting in the back of the head kind of thing. And so you're left with this feeling of, I don't agree with what they did. And I don't know if the show is ever really going to... I don't know if they're going to make all those people go full heel, and it's going to become a thing where they kind of become evil because of what Andor's kind of done to them. Like the rebellion will inevitably push people more into the Empire for the wrong reasons. So I'm interested by that, but I'm interested to hear what you think about the car bomb instance, and then I want you to talk about your favourite character, one of them, Cyril Khan. I'd love to hear both the car bomb and that.
I mean, before we get into car bomb, I mean, whoever came up with a name for Cyril Khan, I mean, that is one of the most perfectly named characters to fit the presentation. Like, he is a Cyril through and through. We'll get to him. I hadn't really picked up on that. That's a really interesting comment. And as you were talking, I was sort of revisualizing it. I was running it through in my head. I have only watched episode once, but I can see why that's the one you have ended up watching twice, because it is one with the most full momentum and the most action and the most exciting things happening in it. I think similar to what you said in reaction to me when I was talking about Andor shooting the initial, Premor guy in the head. I think there's a little moment before the bomb goes off when they take great pains to show a lot of the security forces looking very pleased with themselves about the fact that the car is it's flipped, isn't it? So
it's blown up from behind and flipped.
Yeah.
Over, yeah.
So if anybody is in there, they're either very seriously injured or dead themselves. So I think that might be the little caveat. That might be the little get out of jail free moment within the show. And maybe they had thought about what you're talking about. Maybe I'm reading and putting that into it myself. But they showed more than just Cyril. And I don't know the name of the sort of second in command. I don't know if you know that.
Sergeant Kostek.
Okay, so he was really good as well. I thought, the actor in that role. They showed a few more of the other security forces. I thought all looking fairly like, yeah, we've done it. So I don't know. I'd have to go back and watch it. You've not stumped me, but you've got me thinking about it. But that's the only thing I can think of that would. That's my sitting on the fence. That's my devil's advocate answer.
I'll add something for your argument before we get into Cyril. Is there is the bit which I half forgot when watching it, is the part with Bix, and she's handcuffed to the wall and she gets slammed against the wall for trying to run away, which once again, I'm not condoning of excessive force being used on anyone, but that kind of, if you are holding someone who you believe is a dangerous fugitive or something like that, and they run, obviously what you should do is grab them and hold them in place. If you slam them against the wall, I'm not saying that's right to do, but in that situation, it's not like kicking someone's teeth in when they're on the floor or pulling a gun on them. Like you could see when she gets hit against the wall, the blood going down her face. She's been hit very hard, but I don't think it was necessarily, even though he was being a bit rough and probably was having a bit of a power trip, I don't think he was like, I'm going to beat this woman. He was just more so in the moment. So again, it's that kind of thing where it's, and I think this is what's trying to show with a lot of the police as well, that kind of social commentary of just, someone riles them up too much, so they go a step too far, and then someone goes a step too, and it just gets escalated and escalated and escalated, and it's kind of mirroring what happened in Rogue One in Jeddah, where you could feel they talk about that something in the energy is going to go, and then there's that big shootout with Saw Gerrera's partisans and all that stuff. There's a mirroring of that, I feel, where it's this quiet escalation in Andor, and I think this is showing in local areas where you've got people kind of being anti-establishment in a lot of ways. And the security guards obviously go into Marva's shack, and a lot of the people like, what have you done to this old woman sort of thing? So to put more on your point, yeah, I think it is trying to show them as kind of the bad guys. And it's like, are those tactics valid on kind of a dick? It's like, should you kill someone for being kind of a dick or being an arsehole? Is that really worth it? Or is it actually, they have to be a horrible, despicable person? Or do you go the Jedi route and go, you should never kill anyone unless it's absolutely the last possible option? And I think that's what this show is going to toe that line of. But yeah, I want to hear your thoughts. If you have anything to add on that, Bolt, I don't want to lose. I want to hear what you say about Cyril as well.
No, I don't know if I have any other thoughts. But again, yeah, that's fascinating. And yeah, I loved that moment when they came out and they said, what have you been doing there? She's an old lady. I mean, she's definitely an old lady that can handle herself, which is cool too. I think there's different commentary to be said, and I think the way they handled that moment with Bix was, again, very clear. In my mind, I think very clear in what they were trying to say. I think I don't think this bit was particularly great. I think there was a very clear excessive force, followed by even more excessive force, shooting a guy for running down some stairs. Not that Tim necessarily didn't deserve to die, but his fate was sealed the second he made that phone call. Let's face it.
Yep.
The second he was the turncoat for Andor. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I hear what you're saying about police in general, and I think that's a really interesting social commentary. I agree. There's some lovely moments. We're sort of in it now, aren't we? We'll come back to Cyril. Sorry, Cyril. We'll get to you. I thought some of those moments in episode 3 were awesome with them like banging on there. They were playing like a little rhythm, and they all had it outside their homes or their shops or whatever it might. Everyone had one. So that sense of unity from the village or from the community was amazing. But they'd all play this little tune, which meant like warning they're coming. So I think the show definitely invited us to go against the Pre-Mor. They definitely want us to be seeing them as kind of preeminent Empire or like Empire Stormtrooper adjacent. As I said before, they certainly shoot as badly as Stormtroopers.
They
Can't
do.
shoot shit either.
Yeah, it's there is. I was just thinking as well. Have you seen Orange Is the New Black? Okay, there's a series. It's a very minor spoiler of an event that occurs, but I won't say who dies or anything like that. I love Orange Is the New Black. It's a fantastic show. but there's a scene where someone gets killed in prison by someone putting their knee down, like restraining someone, and they put their knee down the back of their throat. And the whole show is based in a prison for people who don't know. And it's just a young guard who's inexperienced and is just putting it down while dealing with almost a riot that's going on, and he's not paying attention to what he's doing, and he ends up killing this inmate not by malicious means. He was just untrained, he was quite young, all these sort of things, wrong thing at the wrong time, and then he gets vilified for it, understandably so, because he killed this person. And I feel like with the way they were in a less light way, they were kind of showing the guy that shot Tim was then immediately kind of dismissed, not in a light, but he was like, you need to get the fuck out of here. You need to go. And he's like, why? He's like, just get on the ship and go. Give me your gun, leave. Like, that was not the right thing to do, but you're not experienced enough to know, which once again, social commentary, I think, on the police, which is a lot of these accidents. More so when I talk about this, I talk about mainly in America because of gun violence and things like that. And obviously, America, social commentary and a lot of things are aimed at America as a state and as a nation. But it's that kind of idea where a lot of deaths occur not because of malicious reasons, but because people are inexperienced holding a gun. That happens quite a lot in America. There's a lot of instances of that. And the way they handled that as well, where none of the police officers or, security personnel, none of them were like happy that this guy got killed. They weren't necessarily shook up, but they were like, that was not, we shouldn't have done that. This is now a problem. We need to go.
Very clearly going to get covered up, though, wasn't it? Like, there was not going to be owning it or anything. Yeah, absolutely.
100%. So Cyril.
Cyril, yeah. Let's lighten it a little bit. But also Cyril, I think, as a character and his initial conversation with his senior boss, I thought that conversation, like his introduction, that conversation really told us a lot about the show as well. Cyril, man. So the actor, I'm just looking at my notes here, is it Kyle Soller? I've never seen this guy in anything before, but it looks like he actually has been in quite a lot. I thought he was great. Whoever cast him deserves a pay rise. Like, Diego Luna's great. I don't know how to say her name. Is it Adria Aroa or something? Like, yeah, she's fantastic. Go on.
Arjona. So it's either Arjona or Iona. So apologies, Adria, Iona or Arjona. I'm not sure, but sorry.
Like, she had instant impact, didn't she? As Bix, she was 100%. Great and had great chemistry with Diego Luna. And I read somewhere about how, like, in their first chemistry reading, everyone was like, oh, okay, yeah, we're casting her. And I can see that happened. But this guy, the second he's on screen, I don't know about you, and I don't mean this as an insult, and if it comes across that way, I apologize. He looks like a Thunderbird mannequin. but that fits his character, right? And there's a comment made when it's like, have you tailored your outfit? Because everything about him is pristine, like every bit of hair, like his skin almost looks like he's got like a, I don't know, like it looks like plasticky, but like I think it's been done on purpose. It looks almost like too perfect and sheen, and it's like his outfit's all like he's tailored to fit his body, and like I think that's all very deliberate. He's this guy who's takes everything he does way too seriously, and the performance from Kyle Soller is brilliant as well. Like, the second he's on screen, you just know if I work with this guy, I fucking hate him, and you just know that he's going to be nitpicky about everything. There's a different word, but it didn't come to me. He's going to be like nitpicky over everything. He's going to be so exacting everything. He's not going to. Yeah, thank you. That's it. He's not going to let anything go. And this is exactly who he turns out to be. But he has this really interesting conversation with his boss before he goes. And as you said, he sort of almost sweeps this incident under the rug. He's a bit like, this is what happened. We're going to forget about it. Write it up. Make it sound like they died doing something good, but not too heroic. The scene is so interesting because it's kind of played for laughs, the way that this guy is dealing with it. But it's only after you start thinking about it, you're like, wow, that's really, really dark. These two officers have died, and he's making light of it. And this idea of kind of, again, this kind of cover up, or what's the phrase I'm looking for? This sense of like
glamorizing it almost.
Well, like hiding the truth, or like burying the truth, or like burying the lead, or whatever it is people say. This sense of like, we'll put that over there and pretend it didn't happen because it's it's better. I guess maybe we're back to greater good again. Like, all these people later in episode 3, I guess, arguably, they wouldn't have died, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Cyril hadn't gone on his one-man mission to stop it. So, yeah, I think as an antagonist to Andor, to Cassian, who is this guy who will, as we're going to find out, like kind of do anything to make ends meet, but by going outside the law. And then we've got this guy who's like super rigid and super strict and super pedantic, thank you, and follows the letter of the law to the absolute like dot and to the absolute like he talk about the threading on his buddy. Yeah, I've done a bit to my threading and stuff. I think that's a really like interesting dynamic they're going to have between them.
It's kind of like anarchy and obsession. They're the two almost themes. I feel like you've got this one guy who can't let it go. He just and I feel I have a prediction. It's a vague one, but it's kind of like what I think would work really well is that he is a recurring antagonist, and he goes up the ranks of the Empire. We know there's going to be a degree of time jumps here, and so with that, is he going to go up the ranks of the Empire, and is every interaction with Andor going to mentally and physically scar him? And is it going to be one of those things where every time you see him, he was worse than he was before? He's got more cuts on his face. His eyes are more focused and more desperate. And he starts, kind of losing himself in just trying to get Andor. He's forgotten that it's meant to be for the law and the right thing. And eventually he's going to break his own code to defeat or try and beat Andor. And probably that action will be the death of him. I wonder if, they may never, I hope they don't do this, but they may just be like, he's going to be in these 3 episodes and maybe the next 3 is going to be like a vaguely sequel thing. Then we're going to do time jump and never see him again. And I think that'd be a shame because he's doing a brilliant job, as you say. But I feel like that would be a very good opportunity to have someone who is exactly what the Empire wants. The Empire just wants someone who says yes to basically everything and will die just because they're told that's how we do things. That's what the Empire wants. They want blind obedience to death. And if you do that and you show you're willing to do that while not even making the right decisions, as long as you keep not making the wrong decisions, you will go up in the Empire. So maybe with him, he'll make a wrong decision. He'll go down in the Empire. Then he'll become more desperate and won't be stuck with the Empire. Or maybe we'll go the opposite. I don't know. I just, I would really like him to do that. I'm a sucker for watching someone fall. Just like, I love a hero's journey. That's always good. But one of the reasons I love the prequels is regardless of how ways it could have been done better, when you have it, and obviously with Breaking Bad, it happens in a phenomenal way. When you have it where you have someone who seems good to begin with and you can see the threads of them falling and they have chances of redemption and they go and they just fall so far and it gets dark and awful. When that happens, even when it's a villain and things, I really enjoy seeing that because it's that... How far, it's like the Joker's kind of mission statement almost. It's like, how far can you push a person? How far can you change what the idealist of a human is, which in Star Wars is probably like a Jedi, to what the least human, you can be the worst almost, which is kind of the Vader idea. What are these two things, these opposites? How are we doing this? And I think Andor's going to be kind of getting into the middle, the greyness of it all.
Yeah.
But I feel like you need almost 2 archetypes to kind of stick out the dirt in facing in opposite directions. And I would really like him to be that.
Yeah, I agree. He's absolutely the sort of arsehole, sort of prick that would get promoted. Of course he is. He absolutely is. I love that idea. The only thing that, as you said, like if we're going to have these time jumps, that makes me worry that you might be right in your second kind of processing of it, thinking that he might go out of it, is we've seen this character in the trailers, haven't we? A blonde-haired female, like what looks like Imperial type officer. So she's...
I've only watched the trailer once, to clarify.
So she was quite prominent in the trailer and she has not appeared yet. I know there's another character who was quite prominent in the trailer. Sorry for those people who haven't watched the trailer. Just go back and pretend I didn't say that. There's a Star Wars lore character who is prominent in the trailer who hasn't appeared yet. So I wonder whether
I do want to talk about them as well.
Fine, okay.
So, warning to any listeners who haven't watched trailers or seen the posters or anything, but there's a very popular character and we're going to talk about it for a short period of time. So you either have to, again, they haven't appeared so far in these 3 episodes, but I was desperate to talk about them. So this is just spoiler warning. Skip forward a little bit if you don't want to hear about this character. But I assume you'll talk about Mon Mothma.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Whether maybe we'll get Cyril and Cassian, and we might get Mon Mothma, and we might get this Imperial officer, whoever this turns out to be. Maybe they'll have these 2 mirrorings. Maybe we'll have these, because like Cassian and Cyril are kind of the to use that word again, I don't mean it. They're the underground. They're not the central figures of this story at the moment. Whereas Mon Mothma, she's going to be a politician, isn't she? And then we're going to have this Imperial officer. Maybe they're like the figureheads of the two opposing sides, and we've got these other two characters who are like doing all the stuff, as you just said, down in the grey. That might be quite interesting.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention is the only disappointing thing I'd say about this series so far is, and once again, we're still talking about, if anyone's skipped forward and you're worried if we're still talking about this character, we are, skip forward further, is that one of the things that our friend Tonya Todd doesn't watch trailers or look at posters or anything like that, and I can't do that anymore because I'm too involved in everything online, and I'll get pieces of them. I get memes and pieces of them anyway. So if I always know there's a new trailer out because I'll see new screenshots or something before I even want to see anything. Even if I just go on social media to post something, the first thing I see every time. So I watch all the trailers, and obviously people want to talk to me about them, which is fine. But Mon Mothma being in it, I'm so excited. I know she's got at least alluded to quite a large role, and Genevieve O'Reilly, who plays her, she voiced her in the Clone Wars, voiced her in Rebels, played her in Rogue One, played her in the deleted scenes in Revenge of the Sith, and also I think she's like a couple of background non-speaking roles in the theatrical cut of the film. And the fact that aside from the Mon Mothma in the original trilogy, Genevieve O'Reilly has played her in everything is so incredible. It's almost as incredible as Ian McDiarmid being Palpatine, apart from a few voice acting roles, but he's done a lot of Palpatine stuff. And it's like with her, especially doing animation stuff, and you have it with Katie Sackhoff being Bo-Katan in Clone Wars, Rebels, and then Mandalorian. They have such an understanding of the character so much more than someone else. They really get into the character, and she's going to be, as you say, she's going to be in the political side of things. She's going to show with another character who's, I don't know if they've been in the trailer, but I'm pretty certain they are going to appear anyway, which is Bail Organa. Those two are going to be the ones who they start the rebellion. That's not a spoiler. That's the lore of Star Wars. Is they, in both canon and legends, in a lot of ways, they started the rebellion. They're the ones who realised that they've tried fighting it in the Senate for over a decade. Nothing is just not working. It's just, every year the Senate's getting weakened and weakened, and they can't do anything. So I'm so interested to see the political landscape, because that's something in Star Wars that we didn't get to see in the original trilogy or even in Rebels and things. You get threads of it. There's a Claudia Gray book, Leia, Princess of Alderaan, that is how the elevator pitch is how Leia found out her parents were part of the rebellion, and it's set about, I think it's when she's 16, so it's about 3 years before New Hope. Really good book, really, really good. But it's her kind of understanding what her parents are doing, and they've already been doing it for a little while. So it's like with Bail and Breha Organa, they speak with Mon Mothma, and she's in the book a little bit, and she is somewhat of a mentor to Leia in certain ways. And so it's like, I'm just thinking maybe Leia's going to be in. I just realised to myself, maybe young Leia. Anyway, but I'm very excited for Mon Mothma, and that's actually, oddly enough, the thing I was most excited about going into this. And I didn't say it initially because I want us to kind of get in the conversation before just doing a somewhat spoiler warning. Like, I love Andor, and I know we know what's going to happen with Mon Mothma, but because we've not seen the political side of Star Wars at this point, and it's kind of a spy thriller, this series, and obviously what Tony Gilroy has done before. So I'm really interested by the espionage side of Star Wars and how the rebellion really got started, and we saw it in bits and pieces in Rebels, but that was the front lines fighting. How is the Rebels getting funding? How are the people actually communicating that when the Empire, if and when it falls, there's going to be anyone there to allow it to disperse and the rebellion to become the new Republic? How are they going to put those pieces in play without anyone loyal to the Empire finding out and killing them? So I'm very intrigued by her. I've seen a lot more Star Wars than most, but with you and Mon Mothma, still warning of people listening, I just want to know, have you got any sort of thoughts with her? Because I know you've seen Rebels and things like that, but obviously, did you have any strong opinions on her? Or you're like, oh, cool, she's in it.
Yeah, I think more, oh, cool, she's in it. And really, my knowledge of Mon Mothma is from the Legends books that I read when I was a teenager. And they're obviously set after Return of the Jedi. So it's more about actually her and Leia have a bit more of a power struggle at that point about the right way to move forward and do things. So she's always been a kind of tangential character. She's always sort of been in the world of Star Wars for me. But I certainly don't have that level of, I couldn't have told you all that about Genevieve O'Reilly. That's amazing to know that she's done all of that. That is great. And actually that's something which I think we have to celebrate about the Disney era of Star Wars, whatever anybody else says. their retention of people and their use of people across mediums is wonderful. And I think the fact she's started over there and now she's been pulled in over here, and as you said with Katie Sackhoff, and seeing Rebels characters, because we know they're going to keep coming and keep coming because that show is so bloody good. There's a reason why all these characters keep popping up on live action as well. Seeing those characters being realised in live action too, I think that's something that absolutely has to be celebrated about this new modern era of Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely. And one more little spoiler for people, once again, in the trailer, so this is the last little thing, is Saul Guerrero is played by Forrest Whitaker. And he was in the Clone Wars, but not played by Forrest Whitaker. It was a young Saul Guerrero who reappeared in The Bad Batch, actually, played by, I think, the original voice actor who played him in the Clone Wars, but in Star Wars Rebels and in Jedi Fallen Order, the game, and obviously in Rogue One, it's Forrest Whitaker, and he returns, and he loves playing that role as well. And the fact that an actor as big as Forrest Whitaker obviously agreed to do Rogue One, and then the Star Wars Rebels episodes kind of linked in with some things of Rogue One, which I quite liked. And I was like, oh, he did the voice for that. That's quite a nice, cool thing, but it might have been his contract, but because at the same time, but that's cool. And then a year or two later in Jedi Fallen Order, I was like, oh no, he's putting him, when you have a big actor doing the voice for a video game character that's not the titular character, that wouldn't have to be him, and he's choosing to do that, and he's appearing again. He wants to be this character, and it's again, as you say, the retention. And Star Wars has got such a cult following behind it, either the Legends or the new canon. A lot of actors want to be in Star Wars. A lot of just even in small roles, and it's something that people connect to with their childhood, and they're just like, oh, I can't. And once they get to be a character in Star Wars, there's a reason why so many people return, because it's a world that you can't get into in a lot of other ways. There's very few opportunities in other content to be able to be like, oh yeah, your character, this happened to them in this movie, but then we're going to write a book about them. There's going to be a comic series. They might appear in animation. They can appear in other content. For most films that you do, it's just, here's your film. If you're lucky, there'll be a sequel. You may not even be in it unless you're the main character. But in Star Wars and with other superhero stuff, like MCU stuff is more so, if you're in it, you're almost guaranteed to be in it again. Yeah. Whereas in Star Wars, it's like, every character has a story. They may or may not pop up again. And any character can be played by anyone, you know? And that's just one of the things I love. And with Forrest Whitaker, I'm just like, and he's going to show like the dirty side of the rebellion. And then you've got Mon Mothma trying to do it the clean way, and then Cassian in the middle. And it's like, that's the stuff I want. That's the I love, and I said it earlier, I just love the grey line of it all.
So assumedly he might come in the back six.
I imagine so. I think it's going to be quite neat. I think he was only in like a trailer, very brief. Like I remember, I'm pretty certain I remember seeing him. But speaking about sort of characters and things and towing the line, what do you think of Luthen Rael, which is Stellan Skarsgård's character? And Stellan Skarsgård is an incredible actor. The whole Skarsgård family are phenomenal. Alexander Skarsgård might be one of the most attractive men who exists, from True Blood and Legend of Tarzan fame, I'd say, is where most people would probably know him from. But then you've got his, obviously the dad is Stellan Skarsgård, who's in this, and Thor, and Pirates of the Caribbean, and about a billion other things. And then you've also got Alexander Skarsgård's brother, who is, I think is it Tim? And he's the one who plays Pennywise in It.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
It may not be Tim, but him Skarsgård.
Bill Skarsgård.
That was it. I knew it was a short name. Bill Skarsgård. So it's like this whole family, I think there's another one or two of them. They're all just phenomenal actors. And whenever I see Stellan in something, I'm always like, if he's the main character, it's not enough to make me go watch the film necessarily. I'm not like, oh my God, I need to see every sense. But if he's ever in a role, I'm like, he's going to do well in it. So what did you think of Luthen Rael?
I thought his introduction was really interesting because they set up that Bix has this contact that she can speak to in episode 1, don't they? And part of you did wonder, oh, who's that going to be? Which cameo is it going to be this time? And also it turns out to be a new character in this instance, which I think this show feels like it's going to largely avoid those fan servicey cameos. I know you said, do you think there might be a couple later on, maybe some Rebel stuff? But I think it probably will largely avoid most of it. And this was the first opportunity for them to go down that road, and they avoided it. Small thing, I really loved how he was introduced when he was in his ship. It was shot from behind, and he was coming down to Ferrix. There was just something about that shot. It really sold to me what life is like in space, because it did a full 360, didn't it? As he was coming down onto the planet. So I thought he had a really cool introduction. I like the fact he just had a bit of swagger. He was just happy just to walk around, to just strut around the town and slowly make his way there. He has this sense of confidence that things are going to work out for him. So it's going to be interesting if we get any kind of delving into his backstory. I don't think we need flashbacks or anything, but to understand how he's has this sense of presence, how he can fill this room and not worry about the fact that he's surrounded and that he knew to put bombs there, and like, where's all this come from? I think Stellan Skarsgård did enough in the scenes he was in. I don't think he's the best thing in the show at the moment, by a long way. I think Diego Luna, I think AA, that's what I'm going to call her from now on. I think Fiona Shaw, actually, I think all of those people were truly superb. Solar as Cyril, I think all of those people outshone him at the moment, but I think that's because he's been asked to play cool and stoic and stand filling a room. I think as we get to learn more about him, and if he does come to be this surrogate father figure, I think he'll start to shine a bit more.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't want a flashback. What I would really like is the kind of the campfire talk. I just want him and Cassian to have a moment alone, and him to be like, you know, he sees a picture of his family, you know, the trope there. What happened there? And he just says, "Oh, the Empire came in, you know, and I lost them." And that's, you don't need gruesome details. They can maybe say a bit more than that, you know, with the fact the Empire came in and destroyed my house and took this because they thought I was collaborating with rebels and I wasn't, blah, you know, anything like that. But just even one sentence just saying that basically the Empire took away my family, so now I've got nothing left. That's all we need. And that, you know, I know people joke about Star Wars and Marvel doing it a lot, but we don't need like a spin-off show or even a comic book series or a book. I'm fine with just a sentence or two to say, this is where I've come from. You know, this doesn't need to be like, you know, every character gets introduced, we find out every single thing that's ever happened to them, because we'll never get to the bloody point. But yeah, I liked him. I thought he was a cool character. I'm intrigued to see where he goes, but I feel like he's basically being Tobias Beckett from Solo.
Oh, interesting. I was thinking of DJ from Last Jedi?
Yeah.
But actually, all three of those characters have a similar line. They do. But you can kind of line them up, and you can see they've all come from a similar. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. I think that kind of vibe, and not necessarily even that he's going to betray them, but just also they've got the confidence, as you say. They know where they're going. They know what they're doing. They kind of know who they are in a way, which I think is a lot of it. And the characters, both in Solo, Last Jedi, and in Andor, none of the characters that are interacting with DJ, Tobias, or this really know who they are, what they're doing. Finn talks to DJ. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's just running after Rey constantly. Then you've got, you know, Solo still finding himself. Is he more of a scoundrel and a smuggler? Does he have a heart of gold? What's he trying to do? Does he want to go back to Corellia, find Kira, whatever? And then you've got with Andor trying to find out how to get his sister, I guess, and whether or not he wants to be part of something bigger than just him. So you've got these kind of moments, and you interact with a character who knows what they're doing, and you have to figure out whether or not you want to go along with them. Yeah. So as we start to wrap up here, there's obviously the droid, B2 Emo, who I liked, but I feel like they missed a trick not calling him B3 Emo, because then you call him B3 Mo, and I don't really know why they didn't do that. It feels. Why don't they just call him B2 Wally? Because I mean, that is what he is. He is Wally. Yes, 100%.
I loved his introduction because that was driving through like a junkyard, and I thought the music. I did note it down. The music by Nicholas Brittle. Particularly in that scene, it was the first moment I noticed it. So we're only about 10 minutes in, but I was like, "Oh, okay, I can feel it. Feels Star Warsy, but he's doing something a little bit different here." I thought the music for the introduction of BT Wally was fantastic. I liked his little like kind of voice modulation, and it makes sense that Cassian would have a offbeat droid that he's friends with, knowing that he's going to end up with, is it KS?
Close. K2SO.
K2SO, yeah. So yeah, we always get a cool little droid, don't we?
It's one of my favorite things. I know it's a trope, but I don't give a shit. I'm like, I love if you're in like Star Wars, the world of Star Wars. If you're not in like the High Republic era and a Jedi, apart from then, you're basically gonna have a terrible life in varying degrees of things. Like unless you're like a aristocrat or a millionaire or something, you're not going to have a good life in Star Wars. I'm sorry, but having those little droid companions are just it's the Star Wars equivalent of having like a dog. It's just but a more Star Wars proof dog that you can repair and things. It gives the characters a good reason to know how to fix things because they've grown up with a little droid or those sort of things. I like
the fact that he's like a worn out mobile phone as well, because like they've had him since Cassian was a kid, since he was brought from his planet. And I think the fact that it's like, oh god, I've got to charge him all the time. That's just like an old mobile phone. I thought that was a great little joke. Yeah.
I loved it. And I love going back and seeing, like, anytime there's a new Star Wars bit of content and they're like, we've got some new droid stuff. Like, going back 10 years ago, I was like, I'm not that fussed. And now I'm like, I love it. I loved BB-8. BD-1 in the Jedi Fallen Order games are incredible. All of them.
There's one that we don't want to talk about.
Toby,
then, right?
your favourite.
No one's talking about Toby.
You love Toby.
No.
But Toby, the reason Toby doesn't work quite as well is because Toby isn't a cute little droid companion. Toby is a main character who is a droid/boy. It's the Pinocchio of Star Wars. That's why. But if you want to hear about that, I've actually already written. I did the show notes before recording. Yeah. So I've actually already put a link to mine and yours and Ria's and Megan's conversations on Star Wars Visions, and I've adjusted it because I copied it from a previous episode. Yeah. I did say it was all 9 episodes, but obviously season 2's been announced.
Of course it is.
So next year we'll get to delve into that. But.
No more Toby.
Hopefully not. There's not going to be a Toby 2. I would be happy if there's not. That would not be a fun time. But yeah, I mean, I think with this show, what it's done is the only real folly for me is, and they corrected it themselves. They released 3 episodes at once because they probably did it with test audiences or looked at it and went, this is really good, but if we make people wait 3 weeks for episode 3, they're not going to be sucked into the show enough. We need to really... Once you get to episode 3 and you watch it, you go, oh, okay, with the imagery, with the editing, with the darker scenes, with the characters, everything all comes together. You go, okay, I see where you're going. And I like this. I like the direction you're going. The first 2 episodes, they weren't directionless, but they weren't clearly going anywhere enough. It was vaguely, oh, he's trying to find his sister. It was like, right, but there's more to it than that. Where does this take him? And I think the flashbacks really help. Like I know what you said, but the Canary flashbacks, I loved them. I'm well surprised.
Maybe think of Prey, maybe think of Maze Runner, maybe think of Lord of the Flies. Like all the things they were tapping into was great. I think back in the day, if this had been like on HBO or been on a channel rather than in the streaming days, this would have been a pilot episode. This would have been a 90-minute pilot. That's absolutely what it would have been. And as you said, it adds up to about an hour and 40. So that makes perfect sense to me. So although it is 3 episodes and you have to choose, skip or watch the previously on, and the 2 hours of credits every Disney show seems to have. Don't get me wrong, people work really hard on these shows and they deserve to have their name up there. But I mean, it does go on, doesn't it? Yeah, this is a 90-ish minute pilot episode, and I think from start to finish, if you stick with it, by the time you get to that final shot or that final montage between the flashbacks and the present timeline, 5 BBY. I'm in now. I'm definitely all in on the show.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm very excited, and knowing the characters, at least the very one character that's going to be definitely coming up and seems to be quite central, I'm very excited to see where else this thread is going to go. This is going to be the live action rebellion that we didn't get to see. I will say, with funny enough, great music that you obviously mentioned, I 100% agree. I wrote the same thing, and in fact, I felt it the same moment when B2 Emo was going through the junkyard, and it was that bloop 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 music. I was like, this is really cool. I like this. And then from there, I noticed all the different music, and I was like, really good music there. I've got obviously no subtitles for the Canary written down, which is cool, and the community on Ferrix, with the clanking of the metal, as you mentioned earlier,
and the guy doing the
anvil thing, like an anvil clock. I was like, that's genius. I was like, I've never thought. When you think, obviously in our world, it's just the majority of the time, it's you get a big metal thing and you hit it with another metal thing, but it's you get the churchgoers that pull the ropes and they do it and stuff like that. But I was like,
I love that. The church guys that pull the ropes. You really complicated bell ringers.
Is that their name?
I think so, yeah.
There we go. That's how little I know about bell ringers. But that I thought, this show does the aesthetic, the dirty sci-fi aesthetic so well. And I even wrote down, I love the wardrobe of this show. Now, obviously, with Kenobi and other things like that, they're all great, but they're building off a lot on pre-existing stuff. It's like, what was Kenobi like? Let's do that. What was Vader like? He's Vader. He's basically the same. Inquisitors, their outfit's already been created. With Cassian, this is before his time in Rogue One, and it uses the Rogue One looks, which is lots of layers, and I really, really like it. I think all their jackets look cool, their outfits look cool. I think it's really interesting, and this is now going to come across not how I want it. But when Bix was taking her clothes off, but when she was going to kiss Tim and things, that was the most adult scene of that caliber I think we've had in all of Star Wars, on the screen at least. And I feel like they were getting to a point. I was like, we're not going to see nudity in Star Wars. That basically,
I agree. Yeah, that was a little bit like, hang on.
I was like, the closest you get to that is in Return of the Jedi with one of the Twi'lek dancers. I think you see a little bit, and
Layer in the bikini, of course,
and then those obvious parts as well. But I was like, I don't want nudity in Star Wars necessarily, but I was like, but when she took her clothes off, I was like, all the layers. I was like, that's actually the way you kind of layer up on like a desert planet and things. I just like it. I wrote down the note is comfy looking attire, several layers.
Okay.
I just think, I mean, if anyone sees me in any of my podcasts, I'm always wearing a t-shirt and a thick hoodie. So that's my jam. If I was in Star Wars, this is where I'd be living. I'd be living in Ferrix with a little B2EMO charge up droid, and I'd be wearing loads of layers. That's what I'd be doing.
I think I'd describe it as dystopian chic.
Very nice.
Like you said, they all look kind of smart. It's a bit like I've just done Fringe of Tenure, like Fringe season 5. During this terrible future, they all look very good in their they're living in basements and they're on the run, but they all look really nice in all their clothes. So this kind of is the same. I get it. The production design is amazing and it fits the world, but they managed to find clothes within this world that makes them look very stylish.
It does. And I remember when Rogue One came out, they released a line of clothing, which was Rogue One inspired. There was a couple of jackets, and I was very tempted. There was most of them you couldn't get in the UK, so you have to do delivery from the US, which is about $50, if not $100 when it's like a jacket. So I looked at it, and it would have cost me about £300 or so for a jacket. And I was like, I can't quite justify that. I was like, I've got a jacket worth 50 quid. That's normally about, a couple of my coats, maybe a nice one for 100, but like just a jacket that looks cool, that it was a Star Wars one. I'm like, for 300 plus, I'm like, yeah, that's a bit too much for me. I keep trying to drop hints around Megan, so I'm hoping at Christmas hopefully I'll release an Andor line of clothing.
And if you're the US listeners, anybody fancy treating Mike for Christmas?
If you're willing to spend that kind of money, I'd say please just become a Patreon supporter for how many months will that? Will be 100 months, £100, so 300 months. So that's about 7 years, I think.
Awesome.
So do that instead, guys, please. Or if 300 of you do it, then in the first month I'll be able to buy my own one, won't I?
That's true.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jack. Selfishly making it about me. So final thoughts then of Andor before we wrap this up and let you sort of talk about any of your other stuff. Is there anything on here that we haven't specifically mentioned? We mentioned 5 BBY and Cyril, so I know those were 2 big things.
2 big things. No, I think it does that thing that it does. I mentioned a few things with the scenes on Canary. It does echo other stuff, but I think all good shows do, because people like to show their influences. That warehouse scene shootout was awesome. It was like a classic Star Wars scene where you've got 2 guys versus 6 baddies and they can't shoot for shit, and the two heroes can shoot really well and they can escape. But it also had a bit of an Indiana Jonesy vibe with like having to escape falling traps. So Lucasfilm, right? So like that's signed to Lucasfilm. So I think when it did echo, it did it in the right way. It didn't copy, but it didn't homage. It didn't feel forced. It just had a little zhuzh, had a little flavour of things which like experience were within these worlds. So I think it handled that balance really well. I think I could agree with you, but now we've got the arc of 3 episodes. That the slowness is, I've forgotten the slowness now. It doesn't matter to me because I think it was all building to a point, and it naturally got there. I think it got there at a pace that I think it needed to for the show. And yeah, nice to see flashbacks that mean something. Not mean something. The Boba Fett ones meant something. That's unfair. That just feel organic to the story that it's telling. Mm-hmm. Don't feel, you described it as a sandwich. I might at times within that show I've called it a shit sandwich. It just didn't, it didn't work for a lot of the show. But here, every time they cut away, I wasn't desperate to get back. I was like, okay, how is this going to tie into the story? Because you could tell it was going to. Do you think Bix is a former Canary resident as well?
I don't know. I felt like she did have a very strong familiarity with Andor, and it seems odd that they had that familiarity, and there was a degree of a hint. There was a point where they're having a drink, and he was saying, "I'm going to go" and stuff, and then he touched her hand, and she pulled away, and Tim saw it. Where it was hard to tell. It was like that was the kind of action which was like that could be a family member, but it felt like it probably wasn't. There was more than that. Like he kind of fancied her a bit or something.
He's a bit of a player, Andor, isn't he? They set him up as being a bit of a ladies' man.
Yeah. So it's like, if that is the case, then what? Like, does she know about him being Canary because he just confided in her because she's like he's confident, or is it there is more? And I was unsure about that as well.
There were just a couple of. There was obviously the main actress on Canary who shot and killed. But there was a couple of scenes where they were not to his sister, obviously, because we know that's a different plotline we're going to come back to. They just kept focusing on one particular girl within the Canary, for want of a better phrase, Lost Boys. Yeah, tribe. I wondered if they were trying to drop these little hints in, so perhaps she was from there. And I don't know if that really matters and where that would go.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And whether she's a character we might not get a lot more of, which again would be a shame because the actress was so good in the role. Yeah. But if he's left Ferrix, I wondered if she was going to end up on the shuttle with them, but she doesn't. She's still there. Yeah.
I wonder, like, so I'll ask if you have any sort of predictions. I gave some of mine for the more wilder ones, but generally I think it's with the time jumps and stuff. I think we're going to get the next 3 episodes is going to be him kind of finding his way with Luth and Rail. And then I can't remember exactly where the time jumps are, so this is not me confirming. I might be completely wrong here, but I think there'll then be a time jump, and then in one of the time jumps, it'll be a year or so after you kind of see him go on his first mission with Luth and Rail, I would imagine, in the next 3 episodes, and then it'll be a time jump of him kind of being in whatever Luth and Rail is a part of for a year, and I imagine one of the first things we'll see him do is go back to Ferrix, and then in that story we'll see what all these characters have done. I suspect we're going to see Marva die, and I suspect Andor's then going to get B2 emo, because obviously he wants to keep going with Andor, and Andor's keep saying, I'm going to come back for you, but not. So I wonder if they're going to kind of do that, where we're not going to see those characters for a few episodes, then it's going to go back to them. But yeah, aside from the characters I've already mentioned, I won't repeat again, just in case people did skip over the spoiler parts. I'm a lot more excited for this. If I'd watched the first 3 episodes of Book of Boba Fett, I would, I was much more optimistic with how Boba Fett was going to end, and it ended up not being as good. With this, I'm like, it's a very different vibe. It's very much, it feels like it's more thought out. And ironically, it's like the antithesis of Rogue One. There's a lot of issues behind the scenes of Rogue One, as we kind of touched upon, where they changed director and all kinds of other stuff, and there was loads of rewrites. Whereas with this, it doesn't feel like that. And I think Boba Fett felt a bit janky. It felt like 2 different or 3 different shows even kind of squashed together. It was like it almost felt like a spin-off episode. They then stretched and then realized it was too stretched and they kind of couldn't fill it with stuff. Whereas this, it feels like this, I think they've been doing it for years. I think it was only a year or 2 after Rogue One came out because it was so successful. I think this has been in production for like 4 years. So it's like, okay, this feels like they've really thought about this. So I'm very excited. What do you think of where it's going to go and what you kind of want?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think this has definite direction. I think it has purpose. It knows where it's going and it knows what it wants to do. I agree with that. I'm not sure if I have any predictions at this point. I think because this feels like such a natural arc, these 3 episodes, I'm just sort of happy waiting to see where we go next. I agree. I think we're going to get the mentor training montage over the next kind of couple of episodes, aren't we? Where Cassian Cass, wasn't he being called, or Cassa?
Cassa with a K. K-A-S-S-A, and then his it's almost like his where people get changed, they have their names changed and things. So their adoptive name is Cassian Andor. We'll see.
Because assumedly Andor has come from his adoptive mother, I guess.
It does. When I looked up the character names and things like that, both the mother is called Marva Andor, and then the father was Clem Andor, the 2 people who kind of rescued him. So yeah, they're both Andor. And it said obviously his dad was hanged as well, or they hung his dad. That was just like a kind of passing line they linger on for a few seconds and then went by, and you're like, Jesus. Yeah. You're not even going to focus on that. That's quite dark, and it's like another show for the show.
So I guess he's going to like earn his name, isn't he? He's going to become that the titular character. He's going to go from Casa to Andor, isn't he? So yeah, I don't know. I'm happy to see where it goes. I'm happy to, as you've mentioned, these new characters that are going to come in and what new elements they're going to bring. I think at this point, I don't know. I don't have anything specific. I think other shows, Obi-Wan and Boba Fett, have lent themselves more to, oh, this might happen and that might happen. Here, I think I'm feeling a bit stumped because this does feel fresh. This does feel like it's taking its own less trodden path rather than new path.
Yeah, it's a term we've been using a lot, which is a sort of underground feel. But it almost feels like you've got the main events of Star Wars we've seen so far, which is the surface level stuff. It's the hero farm boy, the front of the rebellion, at the front of the X-Wing, who survives through everything and beats the Death Star and fights Vader and becomes a wizard. And you've got that, and these main figures of these big galactic events. You don't see all the stuff that was happening in the background, and that's I think what Rogue One illustrated very well. It was all the sacrifice just to get the Death Star plans that Luke went, I can do that.
Sure.
It was a lot more difficult. That this is a war. This has real weight to it, and I think this is really going to show the kind of the war part of what really happens when you've got a fascist dictatorship galaxy wide and people trying to figure out a way out. And I'm just very intrigued where that's going to go. So then, Jack, you are actually going to be the host next week, the host of the most. You're going to take the helm and go ahead with it all. So please tell people where they can find you. I've put links to more or less everything in the description, but, tell people where they can find you, and you can give them a preview of next episode of who you've got if you so desire, or you can keep it a secret. That's completely down to yourself.
No, mate. So as you outlined earlier on, sort of my journey through comics emotion to becoming, I'm not sure I'll go with host with the most, host with some. It was coming to, the circle is now complete come next week. Yeah, you can find me on Comics Motion with Tony doing Season's Greetings, and then Indie Comics Spotlight a bit less nowadays. That's tailored off a little bit because I filled my own schedule with my own stuff, which is back to the filmography mostly, watching Jason Statham's movies every fortnight. One of those comes out where we are tracking him from his first appearance in Lock, Stock to his latest appearance, which by the time I finish, who knows what that'll be, whether it'll be this Operation Fortune or it'll be the next Fast and Furious, or I think I'm busy up until December 2023 covering all of his movies. So
it's coming out quick though. It's only
yeah.
It's like surprising how quickly you actually, when you start on something like that, you go, God, this is going to take me forever, and then 6 months blink by and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's true. And then Pop Grillers is the other thing I do. Just that little side project that means I have to watch and read and listen and then review it all. And I just get really obsessed with what music I'm going to put behind it. Because the concept, of course, is spoiler free and less time than it takes to listen to a song. Sometimes I hit an episode and I'm like, I just cannot figure out what the right sound is. And it really sticks. I get a little bit OCD about it. I think I am a little bit OCD. As we've spoken many times, compulsive list maker and all that kind of stuff. I think that's that side coming out. So yeah, and a Pop Griller where we review anything from pop culture.
It's amazing. Yeah, I always recommend people with Pop Gorillas just go over to their feed, because they do they release like special collections on Comics in Motion. When it's the summer blockbuster and a lot of the horror stuff they release in collections, which is fun. But just go to Pop Gorillas, and then anytime you see just a title of something you've seen or that you haven't seen because it's spoiler free and that you're interested by, just add it to your episodes. You have to listen to it there and then. Just add to your episodes. And what I like to do, and I think Scott does this as well for 20th Century Geek, is just when you feel like listening to a podcast and you've just got some chores on, or you don't know how long you're going to be, or even if you're in like the shower or something and you don't have to listen to every single conceivable word to understand what's going on, you put on the Pop Gorillas and have like 5 or 6 episodes run by, and it's just delightful. It's a fun little surprise if you're going to get Rhea, Tony, or Jack, or Dan, because
Dan now, yeah.
Dan is now a Pop Gorilla as well, an honorary one, so he's going to be creating a lot more for that, I know. So it's just very exciting to see who's going to say what about the things, and even if they say controversial opinions, like your opinion on Forrest Gump, which I really enjoyed listening to, but I hugely disagree with, but I very much enjoyed listening to.
You mentioned a yes man earlier about Cyril. First thing that popped into my head, Forrest Gump. Imagine Forrest Gump in the Empire.
Oh man, I would love to see Tom Hanks in a Star Wars movie, but I think he would just be like his kind of personality would be like, he'd be like a nice old mentor at like a mechanic shop, and then he would do something vaguely heroic and save the titular character and be killed by the Empire in the process. That's what the vibe I'd get if Tom Hanks was in this universe. But I should plug myself now.
Of course.
Obviously, in the description, my appearance on Back to the Filmography is there. I've put that because I'm a selfish bastard. But yeah, check out Pop Gorillas, check out Back to the Filmography. It's fantastic. You don't even have to have seen the Jason Statham films. And it works quite well because apart from Lock, Stock and Snatch, which everyone should watch because they're phenomenal movies, if you've seen those two, you understand what the Statham is about in his early career. And then you don't need to watch all the other films because there's quite a few films to begin with that are... they vary in quality, shall we say. But I watched Collateral, and that was a lot of fun to do. And I know me and Megan are going to be coming back to the Filmography to do more Jason Statham stuff. But I love listening to it. It's a great idea for a podcast. Pop Gorillas is fantastic as well. Obviously, Season's Greetings is great too. All the stuff you do is amazing. It's all great.
This bit's about you.
I know, but I just want, the Star Wars show on Comics in Motion, people kind of know, and I'm releasing this instead of an episode of Comics in Canon this week, so people have to listen. But yes, obviously there's my other show, Star Wars Comics in Canon, elevator pitch. You never have to read a Star Wars comic in your entire life. The whole point of it is that I read all the Star Wars content that I can, so you don't have to. I talk about the various connections to other content. I've tackled basically every canon Marvel Star Wars comic there is now. So all the mini-series, all the High Republic stuff, everything like that, and all the ongoing stuff with the crossovers, with all the Bounty Hunters and Crimson Reign that's bleeding into Hidden Empire. So if you don't have time to read all these Star Wars comics, you think you don't have an interest in Star Wars comics, listen to the show, give it a go. There's playlists on YouTube as well, or you can just type in Darth Vader Comics in Motion, and there'll be loads of episodes that come up. And you don't have to have read the Star Wars comic. I tell you vaguely what happens, and then also talk about the many connections. So it's a great way to expand your canon knowledge of events in the Star Wars universe through comics, and also learn about species and planets and all kinds of other random stuff I like to talk about on the way. And then there's my show, Genuine Chit-Chat.
Oh, your Comics and Canon stuff, it's a very specific skill you've got there that I think not everyone can do. How you manage to describe without it sounding like you're just relaying. Do you know what I mean? Somebody relaying somebody else's story is quite boring, but you manage to relay what's happening in the story. But I think because you lace it with so much wider knowledge, I think it avoids any of those pitfalls. I think, what you do there is a skill set that not everybody has. So everybody does need to listen to that. And actually, on top of listening, which they do need to do, everyone does need to read Star Wars comics because they're bloody great.
They are. The vast I'd say the worst Star Wars comic is still okay. Like there are quite a few. There's the occasional one that I say in the review. No, not in the review. I don't review Star Wars comics specifically. I give you the plot details of what happens in note form and things. But at the end, sometimes I'll say, this is an amazing comic, you should read it. Or this one isn't as amazing. But they're all worth picking up. And most of them are Marvel Unlimited as well. So you can pick up a few. And if you want something crazy mad, I always say just read Dr. Aphra. It's off the wall. It's bonkers. It's nothing to do with anything else to do with Star Wars. There's a bit of Vader stuff in there, but that's it. A really, really good series. But all the Darth Vader comics are so good. You'd think a story about a character that you already know what happens to him wouldn't be, but it's great. Charles Soule writes quite a lot of Star Wars comics as well. And anyone who reads any of his Marvel stuff will know he is a bloody great writer. But yeah, thank you very much for that. Obviously, Genuine Chit-Chat as well. I spoke to people who've been involved with Star Wars. The best thing to do is type in Genuine Chit-Chat Star Wars, and it'll be all my episodes in the podcast player, or go to youtube.com/Genuine Chit-Chat, and then I've got everything in playlists there, including my Star Wars conversations. So, thank you so much for listening, all of you wonderful, wonderful listeners. Obviously, subscribe to Comics in Motion, share with your friends, do reviews on all the various places and stuff. But make sure you tune in next week for when Jack will be the host, talking about episode 4 of Andor. And then I will be back the week after that. And then it's just going to go like that all the way to the end, where we'll rejoin the two of us, the forces, talk about what we've learned, and experience the finale of Andor. So just thank you as always for listening, my friends. Thank you, Jack, for coming on the show and for starting this journey with me. I hugely appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, mate.
No worries at all. So thank you, everyone. And as always, may the Force be with you.